There are a lot of analog horror series out there, so when I put some of them up against Goku, there were plenty of series that simply didn't make the cut. Thankfully, you guys left a bunch of comments asking for other series to be power scaled and then put up against Goku. However, as Goku lost against the Monument Mythos, he's not going to be around to run the gauntlet this time. So instead, we'll be using the next best thing, the Prince of All Saiyans Vegeta, and be putting him up against a brand new gauntlet of different analog horror series that I didn't talk about last time. This will be a mix of series that I have found since making that video, as well as series that you guys made me aware of that have some brand new and powerful analog horror entities. Will Vegeta be able to survive analog horror unlike Kakarot? Let's find out. If you do like this kind of stuff, make sure to like, subscribe, and let's jump right in. Starting right off the bat, we'll be putting Vegeta up against the series that single-handedly got more requests to be covered than any fight matchup I've ever had, and that series is the Sonic tapes, also known as Shin Sonic. Based off the name, you might think this is another Sonic.exe series, but this takes the idea of Sonic horror in a completely different direction. While it's still ongoing and there are still plenty of questions that need answering, we still have enough information to basically power scale the obvious main threat and most powerful entity in the series, Shin Sonic. From what we know, Shin Sonic is some sort of demonic entity that exists in the world of Sonic that is obsessed with evolving and consuming and eventually wants to do some kind of ritual. While he begins the series mostly looking the same as Sonic, the more animals and people he eats, he begins to mutate and evolve, until in the final episode, as of making this, he is a gargantuan monster that dwarfs entire skyscrapers. The most terrifying thing about him though is that despite growing larger and turning into like a Godzilla-sized kaiju, he has not gotten any slower. We are told he travels hundreds of miles in mere seconds, bringing with him a massive shockwave that devastates whatever area he appears in. This feat has been calculated to be massively hypersonic in speed, and coupled with his massive size, it's very likely that Shin Sonic would fall into town to city levels of power just by being that much of a fast-moving large object. He also has some degree of biological manipulation, as he's created an army of Tails clones that seem to do his bidding, but don't exactly have any feats of their own. In the last episode, he manages to get a Chaos Emerald and seemingly uses it to teleport, but beyond that, we have no idea what he's going to do with it. Still, I think it's pretty clear that this won't be enough to beat Vegeta, as even King Vegeta rivaled his father, who could casually wipe away planets, something that Vegeta himself can obviously do, as we've seen it on screen. However, if you want to incorporate the basic scaling of classic Sonic into Shin Sonic, you can get him a bit stronger. Based on the future past signs we see and the spray art used to represent the characters, with Knuckles being there as well, it's likely this takes place in an alternate version of the Sonic universe around the events of Sonic CD. This tells us a couple things. Firstly, Sonic at this point in the story is verbatim capable of moving at light speed based off of some game guides. If we assume that Shin Sonic is as strong as Sonic at this time, given how he's more powerful and faster than Knuckles and Tails, he'd be light speed as well. Sonic at the end of Sonic CD is able to break the chains holding back an entire planet that when calculated would require dwarf star levels of power. Still though, this wouldn't be enough to get past Saiyan Saga Vegeta, who you can get much further into FTL and is arguably over Brown Dwarf level as he scales directly above what his father can do, as I mentioned earlier. And again, this is giving an extreme benefit of the doubt to the characters in Shin Sonic that they scale to the classic canon Sonic, which honestly I don't think they do. Honestly, with how many people asked for this one, I kinda expected Shin Sonic to be at least solar system level or something. Oh well, on to the next series. The series with the second most requests was the Boiled One phenomenon by Dr. Nowhere, featuring of course the Boiled One, aka Fen228. Now, this guy's backstory is even more vague than Shin Sonic's, though there are implications he's the evil spirit of a Japanese criminal. Unlike many of the other entities I've covered so far, the Boiled One doesn't really exist much in the physical world and is kinda just a mental threat. His main ability is that he appears to people on TV or like a ghost of sorts and then essentially makes them mute and paralyzed and kind of rots them away as they can't move. It's not exactly clear what his endgame plan is with this, but it's probably not good. Now, from the surface level, I can see why a more psychic or mental threat might seem like a good challenge for a Dragon Ball character. Finally, something they can't punch their way through, right? The issue, which is something I've mentioned before, is that to reach this level of power and control control over your ki in Dragon Ball, you inherently need to have a strong mind and superhuman willpower. Mental power kind of just exists as a byproduct of being a warrior. Remember when Goku could just read Krillin's mind? In fact, Dragon Ball characters can have an entire mental training sessions with each other that actually make them more powerful. Now, I assume some people might be pointing out that Vegeta did actually have his mind at least partially taken over or messed with when he became Majin Vegeta, but there's a couple issues with this. Aside from the fact he literally ignored the orders he was given, but more importantly, he actually allowed Babidi to take over his body in the first place and could have rejected it. This is a roundabout way of me saying that seeing the Boiled One isn't going to do anything to Vegeta. His mind is simply so much stronger than a normal person's, it's impossible to prove that the Boiled One can affect him. Like I talked about in my last video, Ki can interact with ghosts and spirits, so he should have no problem turning the Boiled One into the Exploded One. Continuing with this trend of requested series, we have Vita Carnis. Now, I am actually familiar with Vita Carnis and had actually watched most of season 1, so I was kind of confused why people kept asking for it, as the series mostly follows people directly researching the weird meat creatures that make up the Vita Carnis species. They are very straightforward with showing you how deadly or not deadly these things are. Ranging from the literally harmless trimmings to the gigantic monoliths, we get a pretty good understanding about what these things can and can't do. If there's any sign to go off of, the fact that there are people researching them at all should tell you that these things really aren't that much of a threat ultimately. While the mimics certainly are threatening to normal humans, they're gonna get instantly blown away by literally baby Vegeta. No, not that baby Vegeta, that one. While the monoliths are imposing and scary, with their size alone making them a bare minimum building level in power, if they were even hypothetically strong, they don't move, so there's literally nothing they can do against Vegeta. Now, with Season 2 and the secret hidden story, there are potential implications of more powerful entities and powers at play here with the 7 singularities and whatever the prince is, but again, they haven't actually done anything. Honestly, if Saiyan Saga Vegeta showed up on this planet, he'd probably eat a couple Vita Carnis before flying into space and blowing up the planet. Maybe once we learn more about the prince and the singularities, it might turn out they have secret universal or higher dimensional power, but until then, there's not much else to be said. So is Vegeta up for a clean sweep unlike Goku? All the series that were recommended weren't up to par or even as strong as the ones I covered last time. Well, now I'd like to cover an analog horror series you probably haven't heard of. I'm not even sure if it has an official name, so I'm just gonna go off the name of the creator's channel, which is Unorthodox Kitten. Before I talk about this series, I seriously recommend that you just go and watch it right now because this has a purposefully vague plot that I think is very much up into interpretation. You might hear what I have to say and completely disagree with it, and I think that's completely okay. But in my most simple understanding, this analog horror series is about the most scary thing of all, math. Or rather, the lack of math. You see, this series seems to be about artificial gods that are so far beyond our comprehension that to them, math simply doesn't exist, and that simply finding out about the concept of math has led to a gigantic war between them. But how do we know that these guys are so far beyond us? Well, in literally the first episode, we learn about entities that casually create entire dimensions and move along different axes of time to simply move around. Beyond this, we learn about something known as the Taiga that can only be interacted with beings who are non-existent in nature. What is the Taiga? Well, it's an infinitely dimensional concept of space. To put this into a better perspective, the second episode begins with a galaxy, then the universe, which turns into a single point along a grid, with the entire grid becoming a dot in a forest, the forest being contained within seemingly another endless grid, which is contained inside a single one of these weird cube guys, which are the smallest entities within the conceptual space that the story takes place in, who seem to be called painters. In the latest episode, these painter guys appear to be at war with each other, seemingly confirmed by the creator when they hearted this comment. Suffice to say that Vegeta cannot beat these guys. Even if you took the outer versal interpretations of Dragon Ball, which I don't think are legitimate in the slightest, he would still probably only be as strong as one of these cube guys, and these guys are like foot soldiers in a war between these Lovecraftian computer gods. Look how small they are in comparison to other guys. So yeah, Vegeta and honestly pretty much a majority of fictional characters are getting cooked by these painters. What would you do when your opponent just deletes your concept of math? What would it mean to go Super Saiyan anymore when the concept of a multiplier no longer exists? Still though, Vegeta gets 3 rare Ws today. Even then, I can totally see him somehow throwing if he ever points at himself like this. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed me covering the series that you guys recommended. Either way, thank you to my members who got to see this video early, and make sure to let me know how I was wrong in the comments down below. See ya!